Okay, welcome to episode 71 of the SumerSports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm joined today by Tej Seth. Tej, fresh off of vacation. How's it going, man?
Good. Yeah, I'm excited to do this. You've been killing it with these Friday shows, but since I was gone for more than a week, I just wanted to come on and talk football, what we like to do. So excited to do this today for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when you love what you do, there isn't no such thing as work, but work is more fun. And it's been obviously great having you back for the last couple of days. It was, there's like a chasm that's there when you're gone. So we're happy to have you back. The week this week has not been that eventful, except for we have, and we stirred this up a little bit on SumerSports. If you go to @SumerSports on Twitter, we tweeted out our in-game coaching decision model, which is not all of coaching. It's just fourth downs, timeouts, delay games, all the stuff that I think we could all get right on the couch. And when Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane, I almost said Billy Beane, signed their contract extensions today, we tweeted out that Sean McDermott in those in-game decisions last year was bested only by Nick Sirianni, the Super Bowl participant coach from the Philadelphia Eagles, one of the more analytically sound franchises in all of sports. I think some Buffalo fans, I was on Mike Shope's show, one of the great radio show hosts a couple hours ago, and we were talking about it. And I think Bills fans were quite triggered by this idea that Sean McDermott was good. And it just baffles me because I think about this Bills team, and we're talking about one of the best teams in the NFL over the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. And yet these Bills fans in many cases do not believe that he's any good at his job.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, right? Like when a coach gets a extension, the fans really don't have much of a reason to get riled up about it. I think when a player gets an extension that maybe the fans don't see highly, that's something that you can get riled up about because that is counting against your team's salary cap, and we know that it's zero sum and everyone has the same salary cap. But I mean, when a coach and GM are getting extensions, that's coming out of the owner's pocket. So I don't know if it necessarily matters too much from a fan's perspective for that, because they as we saw with Cliff Kingsbury, they can end up really getting fired at any time after their extension. But I do think that McDermott is one of the top coaches in the NFL. I mean, like you mentioned with the in-game decision stuff, he's really good at that. And then if you look at how he's performed above what the market has expected of the Bills these past couple of years, since 2018, he's added 8 wins over his preseason Vegas win total, which is tied for second in the league, only behind Andy Reid and tied with Matt LaFleur and Pete Carroll. So I think based on just a lot of different factors, McDermott's one of the top coaches in the league.
Yeah, and you even look at, and I know it's hard, to take a step back because I'm somebody, I root for the Chiefs. I follow them very closely, and I have some gripes with Andy Reid. I don't think Andy Reid goes for all the fourth downs he should. I don't think he gives it his all in every single game. And yet you take a step back and you realize, okay, Andy took this team over in 2013. They had previously been 2-14. They had not had a losing season since. They've only had one season where they went under their season win total. And that perspective is important, right? I think one thing that graph, and by the way, again, @SumerSports on Twitter, if you're interested at all, I don't know what the intersection is going to be between people that listen to the show and don't follow us on Twitter. But if that intersection is at all not empty, go ahead and listen to us, subscribe, rate, review the podcast as well. The thing that list, I think, gives rise to is that there's no such thing as a perfect coach, right? I think that is really the takeaway. You can ding McDermott. I mean, honestly, I'm interested to see what happens now that Les Frazier's gone. I'm interested to see, people talk about that McDermott took over play calling in that AFC divisional round. I find that a little weird because that Buffalo team defensively was one of the best in all of football that year. And there's a little bit of defense doesn't matter against great offenses type of thing. But the panic, hitting the panic button there in a high leverage situation to me is a little bit of a red flag. But he takes over in 17. They've made the playoffs every single year except for one. And that was a team that previously had not made the playoffs since 1999.
Mm.
So you look at, there's a positive benefit there. They also, they have a pretty good analytics department headed by Dennis Locke. They have like a lot of things going for them that I think build up a great program. And I actually asked this question on Twitter, Tej, because I was interested. Teams that are kind of on the precipice that never actually win anything, they don't fire their coaches very much. But there have been some examples. So, for example, John Gruden took over the Tampa Bay Bucks from Tony Dungy, kind of right where the Bucks were kind of plateauing and not, making the playoffs but not winning the Super Bowl. Gruden took that team and won the Super Bowl in year one. But people forget that after that, that team was pretty bad. That Bucks team only made the playoffs 2 other times during the Gruden era, and they were 9-7, 11-5 ish every time. They were never a Super Bowl contender after. They hired him to get over the hump. And, that was a Tampa Bay franchise that had never once won the Super Bowl. Same thing with this Bills team. So maybe that's one example. I know Kubiak took over for John Fox and won the Super Bowl in his first year, but they won that because of defense, not really because of anything Kubiak brought to the table. It's really, really tough, though, because, I don't know. To me, it seems like a very short-sighted decision to think about moving on from McDermott.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you. I think, and we can see it play out with various head coaches that have had success for so long, but occasionally have down periods because of just the variance of being in the NFL. Pete Carroll and Mike Tomlin come to mind. I think that, there was a minority of a fan base for both Seahawks and Steelers fans that at one point or another wanted their head coaches to be gone. They thought maybe the game had passed them. And we've seen bounce backs from both of them as well. And both teams, the Seahawks and the Steelers, are going to be in playoff contention this year. So I think McDermott's kind of the same way, where Buffalo was kind of built from this rebuilding team without a franchise quarterback when he took over to, a perennial Super Bowl contender now. And just because of the recency bias of the way that the divisional round game against the Bengals ended last year, I think there's a little bit of a sour taste in people's mouths from McDermott's perspective, from Josh Allen's perspective. But I do think that this is the time to buy the Bills, because when you look at it, losing Brian Dable as their offensive coordinator last year, Dable got so much credit for Josh Allen's success and for where the Bills offense was, in going into that playoff game against the Chiefs, where they ended up losing in overtime. And then the Bills went out last year and ranked second in offensive EPA per play, just behind the Chiefs, and including Josh Allen playing the back half of the season with a hurt elbow. So McDermott showed that he could find Ken Dorsey to take over offense coordinator and to still, retain a good offense. And I think that's really crucial in evaluating him going forward.
Yeah, for sure. And this, they've gone through now, or they're going through now, what the Eagles are going to go through too now, with both coordinators moving on. It'll be interesting to see what Sirianni can do, because I think Nick Sirianni, being atop of the list, the best thing he did was give agency to Jonathan Gannon and eventually Shane Steichen. That really turned the whole thing around, because Sirianni was very much more of a rah-rah guy. McDermott was a play caller in Carolina, gave the play caller up, seemed to be a great head coach. Now that he takes it over again, it'll be interesting to see how that turns around. I personally think, when we think about betting, and we're not, we don't bet at Sumer, but we can certainly talk about the markets. I think that the markets are way too overcorrecting for what happened in January when it comes to the Bills. And we saw it, you post on our Twitter account as much as anybody, but when they lost to the Bengals in the divisional round and we posted next year's Super Bowl and the Bills were sort of on par with the Chiefs, people gave those odds a lot of flack. And it's I don't know, man. If they play the Bengals, let's actually re-rack weather too. So let's just say it's a week before the divisional round. Bengals are 6-point dogs to Buffalo in Buffalo. How many times did Buffalo win that game? Because I feel like our intelligentsia about the NFL this offseason is implying a much higher percentage than what's reality.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think, and again, like you mentioned, like we don't bet, but we can use the market to really help our understanding of teams. And the market is more accurate than 99% of people that you see over a big sample size. And when the market had that much respect for the Bills throughout the whole season, we saw them favored in almost every single game they played, and that kind of accumulated against the Bengals being the 5.5, 6 point favorites in that playoff game. I think that tells you a lot of how they believe the Bills are built and how much respect they have for Josh Allen, Sean McDermott, and what that defense has to provide. And I think that going forward, with the Bills being third in Super Bowl odds behind the Chiefs and the Eagles, that makes a lot of sense right now. I think that if you were to stack up the top teams in the AFC, there's a debate at two for between the Bills and the Bengals, but the market, likes the Bengals or likes the Bills a little bit better. And I think I lean that way as well, just because of everything they have to provide. So, I do think just the way that playoff game went, where the Bills were playing with kind of a beaten down defense. They had the DeMar Hamlin situation happen, just a few weeks prior. I think a bunch of things kind of built up for them to getting, leading to them getting blown out in that playoff game. But other than that, I still think that they're a very good team.
Yeah, the Bengals are a very good team too, and probably have gotten better this offseason. But the Bills, I mean, man, you think about that whole proverb that not proverb, it's just like a fact. It's like from 1999 to 2022, Kurt Warner won the MVP and the Super Bowl. By the way, for a team that was plus 150, 150 to 1 to win the Super Bowl that year, the 1999 Rams were meant to start Trent Green. He gets into Kurt Warner. That's the last time before this season that the same player was the MVP of the season and was also won a Super Bowl. That just shows you kind of the fact that the best team doesn't win, right? You think about and I don't want to blow this conversation up, but you think about all of the Super Bowls since then, like the 2000, the Ravens, okay, maybe they were the best team, but they had to bench their quarterback halfway through that year. The 2001 Patriots, the 2001 Rams were the best team in the NFL. They 14-point favorites in that Super Bowl. Maybe 2002 the Bucs were probably, but Rich Gannon was the MVP that year. You go and look, and the Patriots lose the Super Bowl the years that they were the best team. 2007, 11, 17. I think you can make an argument they were the best team. And then they win Super Bowls that are the other teams. Like the Patriots won the Super Bowl in 2004. The Steelers were 15-1 in 2004. And the Colts the Colts lose at Foxborough all the years. And then the one year that everybody thought that they were weak, they had the worst defense in the NFL in 2006. They win the Super Bowl. So it's so funny because what I want to say, and I said this to Mike Shope on the air, and I know it's not fulfilling at all, but the goal for a team like the Bills or the Bengals or the Chiefs is not to point at one Super Bowl and say that's ours. The Rams did it once, and that's hardly ever going to happen. The goal is to point at a 5-year stretch and be like, let's get to the Final 4, the Final 8 in all those years, and just let the numbers work out. And I know Buffalo's a fan base that you lose 4 consecutive Super Bowls, you start losing faith in the law of large numbers, but it'll eventually work for them. I think there's a really interesting question here from Beat Gamer 99. Why are the Ravens so overlooked? They were 7-3 before Lamar got hurt, with coasting towards the AFC North title. Also, a lot of their losses were weird, like the Dolphins game where they blew a 14-point lead. They also blew a 17-point lead to Buffalo too at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the Jaguars game where Jacksonville rallied back to beat them there as well.
And Lamar made one of the best throws of the entire season to Deshaun Jackson to sort of try to put them ahead again, but ultimately their defense let them down. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. You, me, Parker, Sean in our chats, we're always talking about the Browns, and I think that the Browns are a team that everybody has to worry about because I think personnel-wise, there really isn't a better team in the whole league than the Cleveland Browns if you made every position equal. But they lack the star quarterback, of course, right now, at least ostensibly, that the other two teams in the division, the Bengals and the Ravens have. To me, I feel like there is I do agree. I think the AFC North is sneakily the best division in all of football.
Yes, I am with you. I think top to bottom, even the AFC North is really, really good. You have the Bengals who are going to be Super Bowl contenders this year, as everyone knows. But then the Ravens and Browns are sneaky Super Bowl contenders. I think both of their rosters are at a really good point, and even the Steelers are always going to be competitive. So that's why I think it's a little tough to pick a specific team from the AFC North to be like a Super Bowl pick, because that's just going to be such a brutal division, and you know that only one of them is really guaranteed at least one home playoff game in the playoffs. But when you look at the Ravens, Lamar Jackson is, still I think one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the NFL, because the stats that we have, like even EPA per play, from a quarterback perspective right now, doesn't truly capture Lamar Jackson, because he helps his running backs. He, decreases the amount of too high looks that the Ravens are going to get on passing situations. He does so much more than the average quarterback can do for his offense. So I think when you start with that perspective, yeah, 7-3 with Lamar. They were top 10 in points per game. And then the second half of the season, we really saw Mike McDonald and that defense for the Ravens come around from playing poorly at the beginning of the season to being really stout. And that third game against the Bengals, the one in the playoffs where they outplayed the Bengals but ended up losing based on a 99-yard fumble return touchdown, was, I think, like a big inflection point for the Ravens defense, because they showed with simulated pressures that they have some sort of answer for the Bengals. And we know the Bengals are really smart. We know Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase have answers for everything that's been thrown at them so far. So I'm sure they'll have an answer for the simulated pressures and what the Ravens did against them in that playoff game. But we're really seeing Mike McDonald try to figure it out, and he's doing a really good job as Ravens defensive coordinator, and I think that could be big for them going into this year.
Yeah, I think McDonald is going to be one of those where he's going to be a hot head coaching candidate next year at the
Mm.
in January. That's just to me a fact. The only hard part is that the Ravens, you know, they just deal with a lot of injuries, and I think that that has derailed them. Now they had something you got to be careful about, right? And this is why once we when you guys get to SumerSports.com, we will have some opponent adjusted metrics for everybody so that people can kind of do this, but the Ravens down the stretch did not play a very hard schedule at all. I mean, they were maybe the one difference between them starting 7-3 this year and then starting 8-3 and then never winning a game in 2021 was that the schedule was easy enough for them to win some games with their backup quarterback, which was helpful. And that also led a little bit to some of the whole with Roquan Smith, they were this. Without Roquan Smith, they were that. And it's like, well, some of it was opponent strength, and the
Mm.
offenses that they faced were not very good. Although it's interesting, I was looking at some stats today. I think you were on the call with me and Steve and a few other. The Pittsburgh Steelers offense was not a bottom half of the league offense in the second half last year, and the Ravens got them a couple times in the second half. So it's a little bit mixed, but I do agree that McDonald is great. And I think Todd Monken, I mean, look, when Monken last had his opportunity to be a play caller, he was the offensive coordinator for that disastrous 2019 Browns team. But when he was the last play caller, Ryan Fitzpatrick led the NFL in yards per pass attempt. So we do, there is some evidence that they could be really good. We really appreciate all of you for showing up. We're going to, it has been slow to get to people into the room. Thanks, Mark Wills. Really enjoying the content, gents. Perfect. So that's one that I wanted to talk about because honestly, I don't get it. And this is, you're so ingrained with the Lions, and I'm, a fan of the Chiefs, and also grew up in Minnesota, so I know a lot about the Vikings. And so, when you're not as attuned to a fan base, you sometimes, as a national person like we are, you're kind of like, wait a sec, people don't like Sean McDermott, and it's the craziest thing to me because it just doesn't make a ton of sense. One thing that I think we're all agreeing on right now, and I'm going to jump a little bit around here, is Trey Lance. So reports are out that Trey Lance did not get there weren't really any substantive trade offers for him, and that includes Minnesota, that includes some teams that could use a quarterback of the future. Interesting inflection point here for the Niners because they moved heaven and earth to get Trey Lance. It has not worked out so far on the individual player level, but as our colleague Parker Fleming tweeted out, the team has done fine. And it's a good omen of if you just draft valuable positions, you just have a good coach and a good scheme, And when you're bad, you tank, which is what the one hidden part of the Niners. When they're bad, and they pick high.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can overcome this stuff. Because everybody's like, well, what's wrong with the Niners? I'm like, nothing's wrong with the Niners. They threw numbers at the quarterback position, and they're going to probably get a guy at the position this year that plays fantastically. And much like Howie Roseman can go up to a fan in Houston and tell them to go bleep themselves over the Jalen Reagor pick, the Niners can just write off the Trey Lance pick because they're a house. And I don't get this whole like, well, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. If Lance is great, he'll play. If he stinks, some other guy's going to play. And they're probably going to be good enough to win regardless of who plays the quarterback.
I'm totally with you. I think that for the 49ers to be second favorites in the NFC right now behind the Eagles without us knowing who their starting quarterback is going to be week one is such a testament to Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch, and that supporting cast that they have around a quarterback. There is no better spot for any quarterback to be in the NFL than the 49ers when you combine the weapons that they have and Kyle Shanahan calling the plays. And, I respect this from the 49ers. If they decide that Trey Lance is not worth starting and they want to go with Brock Purdy or even Sam Darnold if Purdy's not ready for week one, that's a good understanding of the sunk cost, kind of method there, because the Eagles did this with Carson Wentz and Jalen Hurts where they understood, all right, we saw this year of Carson Wentz being a disaster and we're going to move on, very quickly to Jalen Hurts. While we've seen other GMs still want to try it with Carson Wentz in Indianapolis and in Washington and not having it work that well. And the 49ers are kind of doing the same thing here. They tried it with Trey Lance last year, and we didn't see much of him. We saw him in a monsoon game, and then he got injured. But based on what they think about him internally, it doesn't seem that there is a ton of respect for him. So they're going to move on, and they can come back if it doesn't go well with Purdy. And I think that's like a good kind of habit to have for them.
Yeah, I mean, and you're 100% right. The sunk cost thing, it's like, well, and I've gotten a lot of this question. There are very smart people, very intelligent people who fall for the sunk cost fallacy. And a lot of them are in media. They're like, well, what are they going to do about Lance? And it's like, well, they're going to play the best player, right? I mean, what are we doing here? Like, and I think that a lot of people, and a lot of teams do operate by sunk costs. They try their best, and I get it. But most of the time, sunk costs are not completely sunk. So, for example, the Broncos with Russell Wilson, that's not a completely sunk cost. If they move on from Russ, they're going to have to pay more. You know what I'm saying? Trey Lance is a completely sunk cost at this point. Like, almost all the bonuses are paid out. Almost all the salaries paid out. It is literally just what they paid for him that's keeping him there. And we see it in the data. Like, teams will pay up for guys with high pedigree. I think that the one issue with Lance, though, is a couple things. A, he wasn't the third best player on every team's board. Mm-hmm. Maybe not even, like, he just wasn't. We saw the Jaguars board leak. They had Field second. We knew the Niners at least flirted with the idea of Mac Jones. Mac Jones has been okay as a pro. We don't know that he's universally lauded as the third best player in that draft. So that's one issue. The other issue is he just simply didn't play a lot, right? He simply has not, like, he's started, 3 games since 2019? Mm-hmm. We've all gone through this horrible pandemic, this horrible ordeal. Trey Lance has started 3 games since that point. So it's just, teams love certainty, right? It's why they pay up for veterans. It's why they trade up for, they trade picks for veterans. And Lance simply doesn't give them that. Beat Gamer, this is part of it too. They also traded, but those picks are gone. Those that opportunity cost, the cost of those of getting Lance is gone. So it's very interesting. I think that we see something similar to what happened to the Niners in 2009, where they started Sean Hill over Alex Smith. Alex Smith had injuries, was not effective. Ultimately, Sean Hill gave way to Alex Smith because Alex Smith was better. Sean Hill being a 7th-ish round pick and Alex Smith being the first overall pick, that eventually coalesced. I think we see Purdy. I think we see Darnold. I think we also see Lance this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that experience point that you touched on is really interesting. I remember looking at this last year when Lance was, for sure going to be the starter week one. And Trey Lance had 318 pass attempts in college. Kendall Hinton, the emergency quarterback for the Broncos, a couple of years ago had 251. So they basically had the same amount of pass attempts in college. One ended up converting to a receiver and had to play one game in the NFL as quarterback. And so that's like where Trey Lance's experience comes from, is there just hasn't been enough reps for him to really develop. And the injury was one of the worst things that, could happen to his development last year, because they were going to give him the first couple of games to start with. And that's what makes it really tough, is when Jimmy Garoppolo came back in and was putting up high efficiency as he usually did in that offense, and then Brock Purdy came in and put up about the same efficiency and even a little bit higher in the offense. It really hurt Trey Lance's stock without him playing, and it's to no one's fault. It's just an unlucky situation for him to be in, I think. And it does come back to what you were saying, though, where if he does get the opportunity this year, we could see what a Kyle Shanahan run game with a mobile quarterback that we haven't seen since Washington and Robert Griffin III. So that would be pretty exciting. But I think the chances of Lance starting do seem lower right now than Purdy and Darnold, based on the reports that are coming out.
Yeah, for sure. And it's such an interesting. Yeah, I mean, the other part about Lance's experience is, I want to say back when I was working with George, is like it was like 60 pass attempts where he was trailing even. So it's not even that, like, the sheer numbers. It's the played FCS football in a dome and never trailed. And so, like, even like most of his passing plays were not in true passing situations either. Like, they're all play actions. If you watch North Dakota State play, and it's a lot of so they were really just buying this ceiling, and that's good. And it's okay. Like, they're a great football team, and they've made a lot. They've made the Super Bowl 2 years before they drafted him. They're looking for somebody to take him over the top. It hasn't quite worked. They're probably going to have to settle for being in that kind of just close enough to the Super Bowl until they get a great quarterback. But that's not a terrible place to be. I think before I read our ad for the day, good question from VKNGS. Why aren't teams developing and then trading quarterbacks for assets versus breaking the bank and re-signing them? What could the Eagles have gotten trading Hurts and trying again with even better Carr? So one of the reasons is that you don't have to. So I like to put this out here all the time because I think it's instructive. Back when your guy Matt Stafford cost $50 million guaranteed when he was drafted, back when Sam Bradford was roughly the same, Peyton Manning, the even bigger tragedy was Ryan Leaf, who's actually ended up being a great guy. But Ryan Leaf, not only did the Chargers take Ryan Leaf second, they traded like 5 picks for him. People don't remember that part, but and then they got to belly up and pay him starter money at the top of the draft. The new CBA means if you fail at quarterback, the failure's super cheap. You fail with Darnold, you just go back in with Zach Wilson. You fail with, Trey Lance, you just go back with some other guy. Back before the rookie wage scale, you did have to draft and develop quarterbacks. I think about Tony Romo because Romo was behind Bledsoe, and the Cowboys were never going to be bad enough to pick in the top 10 when Bledsoe was the quarterback. So they had to stash Romo because there was no other young alternative to play. Now it's like, even if you're the Niners and you're picking 12th, you can move up to 3, and that the trade is expensive, but the contract's not, right? So if you fail a quarterback, the getting out of it's not nothing anymore. And I think that's one of them. The other one is the lack of the third quarterback rule, which means that the third quarterback is almost always on the practice squad, which means he can jump around a lot. Like, coaches are very pound poor, penny rich, meaning like they'd rather activate a third or fourth cornerback to play in special teams than to keep a third quarterback around for a rainy day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I do think that if you get to the third quarterback, you've probably lost the game anyways. So I don't know if there's a necessity to keep that third quarterback there. But I think like the question that's posed here with the Eagles specifically is interesting, right? Because I think that like you keep, I think it's easy for these teams to get new quarterbacks if you don't have that good of a roster, because you really just trot out any quarterback for a year. Like if Kyler Murray were to sit out most of the year for the Cardinals and they send out one of their backup quarterbacks this year, they end up with a top 5 pick, and they are pretty certain that they're gonna be there. But like if you're someone like the Eagles, where you have a good roster, even if you trot out a pretty poor quarterback, you're not going to get into that top 10 pick range most likely, which makes it very tough to get that type of, quarterback on a rookie deal that you want, that has a high chance of succeeding. And we know when you get outside of the top 10, it becomes much tougher to find the franchise quarterback.
Yeah, VKNGS. I think probably having PTSD from the Cousins contract, but why would you give a quarterback a second contract? I mean, that's a good question. I still think the most pressing problem in sports analytics, one that we're trying to solve, is not who's going to be good coming out of college. To me, it's who's good on a 4-year window being on a rookie deal versus who's good once you pay him and not anybody else. We know Mahomes passes that test. We know Brady passes that test or did. We know that Allen, Herbert, those guys were pretty much. But even then, it's still hard for them. The ones that are tough are very much the Cousins, the Carrs, the Garoppolos, those guys. Where I'm pretty sure if you pay them $40 million plus, they're not going to win. Daniel Jones, not to our founder Jack Jones. Not very. They're no relation, but not very happy probably at that statement. Here's a good question. Before I get to Amy's question, though, I do want to talk. We are a couple days out from Father's Day. By the way, Tej, I'm one of those, and I know this is like because of my like Protestant roots and my my just like I don't know. My mom was such a so thrifty, but like my ask for Father's Day every year is just. Don't buy me anything. That is always mine. However, if you have a father or a husband or a spouse or a partner or however we want, we're all encompassing. And that person needs to take care of themselves. And you forgot to give them a Father's Day gift. Manscaped.com. Promo code Sumer will get you 20% off. They get the Weed Whacker. And that's for the nose, the ears, all the stuff that's hard, and all the stuff that you forget about because, Tej, you don't look at your own nose other than through StreamYard like we're looking at now, but not that close. I mean, like if I went up like this, people would be a little bit weirded out by me. And then they also have the Lawnmower 4.0, 4th generation tool for your family jewels or your partner's family jewels, which I think technically are still your family jewels. I don't know how this works. Not a legal expert. We gotta get Brad back on the show. Spielberg, one of my former colleagues, brilliant guy. But in any event, there are plenty of men out there who probably need a Manscaped, and Manscaped.com promo code Sumer will get you 20% off the whole catalog. So go ahead and support the show. The easiest way to support the show is through our advertisers. We're gonna have another advertiser once we get to the July 1st week. Really excited about that because really it's another brand, much like Manscaped, that I'm all for. Amy, one of the frequent listeners to the show, Amy Bright. What's up, fellas? Would you bet the Broncos win total over? We wouldn't because we're not allowed to bet at Sumer yet. We have to. There's some legal things we got to do to make sure that we can. However, I would if I could bet. I would bet them to go to the playoffs at 2-1. I bet them over. And it's, to me, all about how much Sean Payton's worth and how little stock I'm going to put in one bad season of Russell Wilson among many good to great seasons. And I think if you put it together, take care of his health a little bit better, protect him more, do all the things that'll make Sean Payton look like a genius, I think that they can win, even if in a tough AFC. What do you think, Tej?
Yes, no, I'm with you. I think it's good to be optimistic about the Broncos this year, and I think you can draw a parallel between Russell Wilson's career and Aaron Rodgers' career, right? So Aaron Rodgers from 2008 to 2014 was one of the best quarterbacks in the league, couple MVPs, got the Super Bowl in there, but then we saw something really interesting happen in 2018 and 2019 where he just became outside of the top 10 in EPA per play both of those seasons. And it started to look like he was declining. And I think, a lot of people were pointing out that his efficiency has gone down. But they hire Matt LaFleur in 2019, and it takes a year to gel. And 2020, Aaron Rodgers goes out, ranks second in EPA per play, wins MVP of the league. And then we see that again in 2021, same exact story, ranks first in EPA per play, wins MVP. And I'm not saying Russell Wilson is going to win MVP this year or even rank top 5 in EPA per play, but when you look at someone's whole career and you're using some type of updating system, the prior stays for a long time. And our prior with Russell Wilson is that he was a top 5 quarterback for so many seasons in a row. And we saw some decline at the end of 2021 when they ran into the Rams' number one defense 3 times in a row or 3 times in the last 9 games. And then we saw some pretty good play from him, in the year after that, and then the Broncos season happened. But I think that because with Sean Payton there and with the receivers that the Broncos have, that you will see a boost in their offensive production this year.
Yeah, I mean, I always trot this out. And it's funny because last year when people were talking about Wilson and you looked at like time to throw, you looked at throwaways were actually not a problem for Wilson, but mostly it was discipline in the pocket, hitting the back foot, getting things off. Rodgers in 19 did not buy into the offense, right? At all. Like there was still a ton of throwaways. There was still a long time to throw. It was year 2, as you said, in that LaFleur and Hackett system where he did really well. And, that was always like my bear case on the Broncos last year, which was to say it might be beneficial to get Hackett in there. But remember, Aaron Rodgers, one of the best quarterbacks to ever play in the league, took longer than just 1 year to have some success in that offense. The thing that I like about Peyton, a couple things. So firstly, Peyton and Drew Brees joined New Orleans the same year. Drew Brees had come off a shoulder injury that basically ended his career in San Diego the final week of 2005 season, and that it basically ushered in the Phillip Rivers era. So there were injury problems. There were also height problems with Drew Brees. Wilson has similar ones. And then you just look at Peyton and I know that he hasn't gone over the win total every year the same way that guys like McDermott and Reed do, but he's constantly getting more out of that team than the fundamentals would suggest. I mean, we're just 2 years ago, Jameis, Trevor Siemian, Taysom Hill, and Ian Book. That was a 9-8 team. That team makes the playoffs if the Niners don't come back from 17 down on the Rams in week 18. That team's the one in the playoffs in 2021. So and then you add to that the defense. I know they lost to Giro Evero, which I think it'll be another one of those defensive coordinators we talk about as a head coach next year. But that's a very, very it's a tough one because I think if they're in the NFC, it's a great case because every team's kind of mediocre there except for a handful. AFC, it's tough because you got to go through the Chiefs. But you look at that division, and I think the Chargers could always fall off. The Raiders, I think, are going to be pretty bad. So you have some opening there alongside Kansas City to go ahead and win that, to win enough games to make it there. Broncos have not beaten the Chiefs since week 2 of 2015, which was my second week in the entire football industry. That's how long it's been. I remember that game like it was yesterday. So they'll at least have to get over that hump at some point. That doesn't mean they need to beat them this year to make the playoffs, but I do think the future is brighter for the Broncos than it has been. So that's something to think about there. Let's finish this with a discussion of the gambling, because I know you and I, so just to be, upfront with everybody, we at Sumer, because we have access to some team IP, we have the same gambling restrictions as as members of teams do, meaning we can't bet on any sports. And that is because, and I want to lay this out here. The reason that team employees can't bet on sports is because they have access to data on athletes that can span multiple sports. So in theory, for example, if you were, let's say, if you wanted to bet on a minor league baseball game, you would have access to some minor league data because some of those players could have been drafted by your NFL team. And I know that is harsh, and I know that is broad, but that's essentially why they're doing it. Now, there's some funny things in the gambling policy, like you can bet on horses, in a casino and stuff like that. All of that is like a little bit, it shows kind of how weird this is, and how they basically made the gambling policy so that they could bet on things they still want to bet on, which is horses and stuff. But make no mistake, the reason that team employees can't bet on any sports is pretty obvious because of the access to the data. NFL players cannot bet on NFL games at all, and I don't believe they can bet on NCAA football games either. They can bet on other sports, but not in the facility. So they can bet on baseball as long as they're at home. They can bet. They can't go into a casino. That's another part. They can't go into a sports book. That's illegal. So like there's all this, but they've been doing this forever, Tej. It's just that now, instead of logging into smoothbets.ag or whatever and getting the best of it on a game, whether it be a football game or another sport, they're logging into DraftKings, which is a legal entity that is able to catch them betting with geolocation and all that kind of stuff. I do not believe that gambling is any more of a problem now than it has ever been in the NFL. I just think we have the mechanism to catch them now. And so when people talk about this betting thing as if the proliferation of sports betting is the reason that we're having this issue, I bristle a little bit. I think it's more about that we have access to the information on these players' behavior, and we're acting on it now per the rules that have always been there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it really starts with the teams. Like the teams are the ones that should be making sure that their players know all the rules, because it gets really complicated, like you mentioned, like with the horse betting exception. The players can play fantasy football as long as the prize pool isn't greater than $250 is another exception. So it gets really in the weeds when you're a player and you have all these things going on, and you also have to think about the betting policy. But I know some, team staffers that have told me before that they can't even log into any betting websites when they're in the facility. Because if they wanted to use like market ratings for one of their models, they wouldn't be able to get it from a DraftKings, from a FanDuel in their facility. And that's the way that these teams should be going about it, is just making sure that no one can get onto their websites in the facility. And it goes back to the Jameson Williams and Lions betting story, right? So the two kind of conflicting reports about it was Jameson Williams was in a team facility when he bet on a sport that wasn't a league that wasn't the NFL. There's one report that said it was at a team hotel during an away game, which is classified as a team facility, and then another one that says it was in the Lions facility itself in Allen Park. So the latter is a bad look. Like, you should know better, and you shouldn't even be able to get on to gambling websites or gambling apps when you're in the Lions actual facility. But if it's the former, I think that's where it gets a little hazy with the rules, because it's hard to know for a player to know exactly what classifies as a team facility when you're not actually in like the facility that you're used to, I think.
I think you're 100% right. And you are right. Like the second NFL team I ever visited as a member of PFF was Detroit. And I was in their facility. And it was funny because I literally just went to one of these sports betting sites to try to look up what their future was for one of these teams. I can't remember how it came up in conversation, and it was blocked. Like, you're 100% right. Mm-hmm. It's pretty explicit. Like, you can't be doing this stuff in the team facility, which is great. And I do know that's something the teams struggle with. Like, I know that a lot of teams try to use betting market information. Now, the funny thing is, and again, when I was at PFF, the information only went formally one way. We gave data to the teams, or sold data to the teams. So the betting policy was a little different because we weren't getting information formally back from them. But the teams would call me and request, hey, can we get betting market data for the draft? And I'm like, well, why can't you just get it yourself? And they're like, well, we can't, like, it's firewalled here. And so it's 100%. Like, I think it's explicit when they're in the team facility. On the road, that's where the education needs to be there. I do think that I don't have a problem with the way that the policy is, especially for team employees as well as players. I just think maybe we have to educate them better. And I also don't have a problem, by the way, with this idea that the NFL is, quote, in bed with these sports books, and then the players can't bet. The players are going to see a huge markup from this. Not as much as they should. As I talked about last week on the show, I'm very pro-labor. I think they should get more as a percentage of but this money that's coming into the NFL will raise every boat, including the players. And so the players are partaking in gambling. And in fact, they're benefiting from it. They're going to benefit from it immensely through stadium deals and all these things that make the league more popular. The players are going to see that money. And so I don't have a problem with the league getting in bed with gambling. I think it makes it, more, makes the league more popular and all this stuff. I love, some of these sub leagues like, XFL, USFL getting into it as well, because again, it grows the game. We just have to be honest. We have to be, I think we just have to do a better job of messaging. And I think that the stuff that Florio is doing on Pro Football Talk, where he's like, everything we need a more educated betting populace. I mean, all of us, have had various stages of being clueless, and these sharp bettors on the internet will tell us how big of idiots we are, but they're right. I mean, like in a lot of ways, everything Florio talks about when it comes to betting, for example, is through the lens of somebody has never bet. And so knows, none of the intricacies of how it actually works. And I think like we do need to, if we're going to see this league get more in bed with gambling, we have to have people who are experts in actually gambling talking about kind of how it goes, because this idea that the NFL is somehow morally onerous for encouraging gaming while not letting their players bet on their own games, that's an ignorant statement. You do not want players betting on their own games. That's bad. And this idea that they're not benefiting from it is also wrong. And so we just need to educate people better. We need to stop having scare tactics. And, I think gambling is, it can be good as long as, we do a good job of regulating and restricting it. And that's basically what we've been doing. The reason we're getting so many cases is because we've regulated the industry. And now it is like the product, sort of regulation. As we close up here, Tej, let's take a few questions from the listeners. If you have questions, go ahead and throw them, sort of in the chat. We did talk, we did talk a little bit, and I do want to finish off with the running back conversation. Last week, Tej, I talked about if you want to make running backs have better, compensation in the NFL, you need to do away with the rookie wage scale. Mm-hmm. And you may need to do away with the draft altogether. To me, that's like the only way I think to do it, because if you change the rookie wage scale for different positions, teams are going to draft differently, right? And so you're just going to see running backs never drafted high. That's just going to be how it goes. So I don't think that's enough. I think that abolishing the draft is never going to happen. And I think all of us selfishly love the event. So, we're talking on both sides of our mouth. But that to me is the only way I think that you can give different, like you're going to get a situation where running backs are going to get their due.
Yes. No, I'm with you. And, just to throw some data out there, Brad Spielberger wrote a really good article yesterday about running backs, and Texans Cap, who does really good work, responded with the graph he was looking at. So from 2011 to 2023, if you look at position contract APY growth, how much they're making per year, the salary cap has grown 87% in these last 12 years, which is really good for the league. Quarterback contracts have grown 189%. Tight end contracts have grown 130%. And you can go down the list and see really big jumps for almost every position in the league. Running back contracts have only grown 13% in this time, while the salary cap has gone up 87%. So running back contracts are really lacking behind right now. And this is the second contract nature of the things. And that's the really tough part for these running backs is, for most positions, when you get to your second contract is when you start the peak of your career. Like the peak of most players' careers in most positions start around 25, 26 years old. And we see these players really excel at those ages. For running backs, because of the wear and tear and the functionality of the position, their peaks are around 22, 23 years old. And so that's at the start of their rookie contract. And that's why I agree with you on the rookie wage scale. Abolishing that and having players decide what their market value is when they come out of college, instead of that being decided for them based on their draft slot, is the right way to go here. Because now these running backs that are going to provide a decent amount of value their first 4 years are going to get fairly compensated for those first 4 years, even though those next 4 years after their initial contract is done won't be as high as other positions.
Mm-hmm. And the draft kind of is the only means that you can push them down and say, well, you're still not that valuable because we only took you at 50, right? But if they all sort of held out, it would probably help, right? If we didn't have a draft and you had to, pick up running backs, I think that you would start to see the market equilibrate a little bit. I think keeping the draft in place, but abolishing the rookie wage scale would help, especially for like these truly elite running backs like Bijan Robinson and Saquon Barkley. They would get theirs early, right? But later on, I think that teams would just kind of get around it. I mean, these teams, they're slow to it, but they adapt to what's optimal, generally speaking, over a long haul. So that's an important thing to think about. Like I said, I'm pro labor. I loved, the hardest part, and this is where I think people misunderstand analytics a lot, is like guys like you and me, like we want to see these players get paid. We also want to see these teams win. And as long as there is a competition to football, we are always going to eschew the art and the thing that we love. Like I think about, and these are really, really smart football people. I think about somebody like Nate Tice, and I think about kind of how he views the game, or somebody, I used to work with at PFF, Seth Galina or Deontay Lee, and they're like, they see the game maybe more artistically, and sort of there's like a beauty to it, right? And that was why the perfectly blocked runs article made so much sense, because it's like when a run is perfectly blocked, it's no more beautiful. Like there's no more beautiful play in football than when that happens, right? Yeah. And it happens to be efficient. It just doesn't happen very much. And so guys like you and me are like, well, I know it's beautiful, but it doesn't happen very much, and hence you're chasing after something that's not attainable. Whereas the football people are always going to be like, well, but it is beautiful, and it's the way the game should be, and all this kind of stuff. And so that's where the conflict is. I'd love to see the rules changed so that paying a running back is part of an efficient strategy. That's what I'd love to see. And I think that that's where we can find common ground with people who want to see running backs paid more, because we all are pro labor in that way. Analytics people want to see the game such that the optimal strategy is one that gets everybody paid. And that's a tough conflict, because we don't have the power, of course, to change football, although we are changing football to an extent. I'm going to write an article this week about how people are going for more fourth downs and all this stuff. Like it is working. It's just slow. And progress is, by its very nature, slow. Speaking of something that's not slow, Tej, the growth of this podcast has been immense. We've seen, month over month, 25%, 45%. We love the fact that you guys are coming and listening to the show, watching on YouTube, especially, with Thomas being out. We've got this, give you guys the true stars of Sumer, Tej, Parker, people like that have been hosting the show with such a plum. We are going to continue to give you guys, content. We're going to do more game preview stuff. We're going to do more game review. We might even have live game stuff for the fall. So just stay tuned here. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, go to SumerSports.com, sign up for the newsletter. You're going to start to see the newsletter there fairly soon. You're going to start to see content and data on that website really, really soon, as the season is approaching really fast. So I'm really excited for that, Tej.
Yeah, and let us know if we've kind of thrown around the idea of drafting a best ball team while doing one of these, and kind of showing people what our thought process would be, given that we're about to get into July here, and July is really the time to draft best ball teams. So if that's something that interests you, let us know. And I'd really love all the comments that people leave on the show, and the reviews that people leave on Apple. I'm an eager beaver myself. Like one of the comments said that they were, and that's why they listen to the show. So that's always really nice to see when people are showing that they're enjoying listening to this.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things to do. I know we pay our bills by doing data science, and if the people that come to the content, that's it is something that we pour our hearts and soul into. But there's also stuff we got to do during the day of coding and everything, and you're just so top notch there, and it's really cool that we at Sumer have found people who are both technically amazing, but also really good on air and really good at talking about football. I do think that will make us incredibly valuable as an entity. When people want to come and see first in football intelligence, they'll come and see Sumer. So for Tej Seth, for Eric Eager, this has been episode 71 of the Sumer Sports Show. We'll see you on Monday with myself and Thomas Dimitrov for episode 72.